Well, it's funny. So they had, at the same time going on, there was an audit of our largest school district in the state, Jefferson County. And it was a national news story. Jefferson County Public Schools had instituted a new way of busing where they utilized AI of some kind to create bus patterns. And kids weren't getting home until midnight or 1 o'clock on the first day of school. They go to school, they realize how big of a problem it is, and then they have to cancel school for the rest of the week. They dropped a third grader off in the middle of a highway. And so they do this audit. We find out the superintendent and all the high-level staffers are using their private devices to communicate about this so that it isn't available for open records request. I actually believe that there was a text message that said, use your private device so that it can't be tagged by the Open Records Act. In another committee room that same day, they were citing the audit that had been made available by the Open Records Act.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to the spooky edition of the American Potential podcast. I'm your host, David Frum. As Halloween creeps close and we get ready for spooky decorations, haunted houses, and things that go bump in the night, it's easy to get caught up in the thrill of a good scare. But sometimes the real chills don't come from ghosts or goblins. They come from our state legislatures. Just like a foggy graveyard can hide lurking shadows, some legislation can conceal frightening consequences. On the surface, a bill might look harmless or even friendly, like a jack-o'-lantern. But once you read it, you find out it could have a chilling effect on government transparency. And that is what we're talking about today with our guest, Liam Gallagher, who's a legislative director in Kentucky for Americans for Prosperity. Liam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Yeah, love to have you back. And I'm really interested to hear, we're doing a series whenever we're leading up to Halloween on some of the scary things that happen sometimes in our state legislatures, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. But I think, one of the things that we saw in Kentucky was something that I think was inadvertently scary. So maybe tell us what this legislation was all about and how it transpired.
Yeah, so 2024 was the year. Kentucky held session starting in January. There was House Bill 509 was filed. And on the base level, basically what it said was for state agencies, you're required to have an email for employees. And so people can do their business through their state email address. And that's a good thing. But in the background, what it did was it said that if a state agency requires its employees to have a state email address, then when open records requests come in under the Kentucky Open Records Act, you're not required to search for public records on their private devices. And so it was sold to the public as a bill of goods promoting transparency. The legislature was behind it. The governor was behind it, which is weird for Kentucky because we have a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature. It was sold as, well, we want to promote transparency, so we're requiring everybody to do all of their state business on their state email. But then deep down in the 30-page bill, there was an exemption for state agencies to search on private devices of government officials if they were compliant with the requirement of having a state email, not necessarily utilizing it, but having it. And so what it did was, if it were to pass, it would have blown a wide open loophole to allow for government officials to utilize their private devices to text, email, to call, and not create public records and have them available to inspection to the general public.
Yeah, so essentially, if they're using their private device rather than their government provided one, the transparency doesn't apply, which is funny because, I've been around government at the federal level and the state level quite a while, despite how I look. But the reality is that normally if you kind of pollute your personal device, you do governmental business on that, then that's fair game. If there's a lawsuit, if there's, some sort of Open Records Act or something like that. So this stymies that. This kind of doesn't allow for that. It's no good.
Exactly, and it came out of a lawsuit. So, the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife was sued by the Kentucky Open Government Coalition because they didn't have email addresses for their commissioners. So the commissioners are appointed by the governor, right? Their job is they represent a part of the state. And the Open Government Coalition had requested some records. They came back and denied that request, saying, well, we don't have any public records. What they found was they had the public records. They were just on private devices. And so the attorney general inevitably agreed with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so the Open Government Coalition sued. The appeals court ruled what is the standard, which is regardless, private device, public device, it is the control over the records, not the device. And so the Department of Fish and Wildlife has appealed that. It was actually heard in the Supreme Court last month, but they were trying to preempt the Supreme Court decision on this case by applying this law to the future and the past to make sure that those records weren't accessible to the public.
Yeah, and I mean, transparency and open records are so important. I mean, the crazy stuff that happens at the state and the local level, even sometimes even more than when people feel like no one's paying attention or no one's ever going to find out, is really unreal. Sometimes it's sloppiness, but other times it's some real nefarious stuff. I know, I live in the state of Illinois, and our chapter here has done some Open Meetings Act stuff, open records, and when you get those records, I mean, it tells a story sometimes. We found a library that was doing political work with their government money in their government meetings to pass a referendum to support this. And I mean, it was illegal. It was just straight up illegal. And now the state's attorney's looking into it and all that. But that wouldn't happen if we couldn't get the records that showed what was going on. So this bill was originally written one way, right? So it seemed good at first. Isn't that right? Did you have any concerns with the original one?
So we were concerned with it, and we worked with our partners over at Americans for Prosperity Foundation. Just looking at the bill, they do a lot of open record stuff, but we were concerned with it. But we were confident that it would give a judge leeway to inspect a private device. So basically, at first, it still established this idea of constructive possession or constructive control, which is the government has possession of the documents regardless of what device they're on. And so the way that it passed out of the House, we weren't happy with it, but we were fine. It still protected public records. If you could prove that there was a public record on a private device, then you would be able to go to court and get that record, which is kind of the federal standard. But then it goes to the Senate, and in Kentucky, to pass a bill, it has to have 3 readings. So this bill's sitting in committee. We see that it's being taken out of committee at the end of each day, given a reading, and then put back into committee. So we know that they're trying to pass it. And I believe it was a Monday night. I was at a fundraiser, and I get a call from the sponsor, and he calls me and he goes, hey, I know we've worked together on this. The sponsor was really good at making sure that our language was put into it, and we really appreciate him for that. I know we worked together on this. They just sent me the Senate committee sub, and we have a hearing on it at 9 a.m. This is like 8:30 at night. So I'm on my phone trying to call up the foundation folks, the policy folks. What's going on? Are we supportive of it? Are we opposed to it? And what we come to find out is when we actually read the language in the Senate, the bill was already bad, but it got so much worse. They changed the definition of a public agency. And so at the time and how it currently is, because we killed the bill, but the definition for a public agency was any government official, state or local, and any government department. Well, they removed any government official from the definition of public agency. And so they exempted the governor, all of his cabinet appointees, every school board member, every government official in the state became exempted under this. And so we go to committee the next morning. I didn't hear back because it's 8:30 at night. Nobody's on their work phones. I didn't hear back until like 7 a.m. the next morning. And I am rushing. I'm throwing on my suit from the Capitol, learning that we're opposed to this. And as I'm driving to the Capitol, which is about an hour away from me, I have somebody writing testimony for me. And I'm just going with it. And we get into the hearing, and one of the lawyers who's a state senator asks, I'm pretty sure that that this exempts every government official. Am I wrong? And in the testimony of the sponsor, he says no. Well, he's an engineer. He's not a lawyer. He was told by leadership that that's not what this did. And then Michael Abadi, who is the counsel for the Kentucky Press Association, gets up and goes, no, it actually does. It exempts every single government official. And so then I go and testify, and we let the committee know that in turn, what the bill actually would do is make it so that the legislature has no ability to check in on the accountability of the governor because he's now exempted from Open Records Act. And luckily, the Senate was smart enough to realize that this was a really bad idea, and they removed the committee substitute from it. But, if we hadn't been there, if we hadn't gotten that document before it, because many of the senators hadn't even gotten the committee substitute at this point, they got it as they walked into the room. If we hadn't gotten it before, that would have passed out of committee and very likely passed on the floor. And then the governor and every other government official would have been exempted from the Open Records Act.
So I might be asking you to speculate, but how do you think this scary provision, stick with our theme, that would have exempted elected officials, how do you think that got in there? Was it an accident? Was it just an oversight? Was it well-meaning? I'm actually going down the positive road here. Or was it just to actually exempt elected officials from transparency?
I think it was well-meaning, right? So I want to think it was well-meaning. So the goal from the sponsor of this bill was, we want to be able to recruit talent to come work for state government. And so if we have to tell this talent that everything on their private device is available for inspection by the public, nobody's going to come work for us. But in reality, that's just not how the Open Records Act works. It's a trust between the employee and the record's maintenance. If there is a record, you find it, you screenshot it, you send it to me. If there is no record, there is no record. And if you lie about it, then somebody's got to prove in court that there's a record, and then they can seize your device and take it. And so I think that was the goal. But with law, things are very nitpicky, and not everything's black and white. So if you all of a sudden remove a government official from the definition of a public agency, and the Open Records Act regulates records from public agencies, well, then there is no government official in there, and so they're exempted. So the idea was that it was well-meaning, and I think we see that from the Senate being willing to take that committee substitute off. So the bill had technically changed, and then the bill was changed back once they realized how bad it could have been. But, who knows? I think the governor knew. The governor was attorney general before he was governor. As attorney general, he consistently stated what the law said, which was, if it's a public record on a private device, it's available for inspection. And then he came back when he was governor and hated open records requests and said, well, we need to change the law now. And then tried to lie to us and say, well, that's not what the bill does. Specifically saying, trust me, in a press conference. I don't trust the governor. I don't trust anybody when it comes to government. And if there wasn't the watchful eye of the Open Government Coalition, the Press Association, and us, this could have been really, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we have checks and balances written into constitutions, but also, there's transparency provides a great balance and check, because it allows a lot of times ordinary citizens to go and see what's really happening with their tax dollars. Again, I live in Illinois. It's not one of the most honest states ever from historically from a government standpoint. And, there's things that records that are available that investigative journalists, for instance, have leveraged and to incredible effect that results in dozens of corruption convictions. And highlight the incredible waste and abuse that's happening and just wasting taxpayer dollars. It's such a problem at every level of government, and the antidote is more sunlight and more transparency. So, the fact that they were trying to exempt elected officials is pretty incredible. I wonder if in some closed doors they were like, gosh darn it, they caught it, man.
Well, it's funny. So they had, at the same time going on, there was an audit of our largest school district in the state. Jefferson County. And it was a national news story. Jefferson County Public Schools had instituted a new way of busing where they utilized AI of some kind to create bus patterns. And kids weren't getting home until midnight or 1 o'clock on the first day of school. They go to school, they realize how big of a problem it is, and then they have to cancel school for the rest of the week. They dropped a third grader off in the middle of a highway. And so they do this audit. We find out the superintendent and all the high-level staffers are using their private devices to communicate about this so that it isn't available for open records request. I actually believe that there was a text message that said, use your private device so that it can't be tagged by the Open Records Act. And in another committee room that same day, they were citing the audit that had been made available by the Open Records Act because the Lexington Herald-Leader and the Courier-Journal and all of our local newspapers had gotten it and requested it. And so Michael Abadi, who's the Kentucky Press Association person, mentioned that. He goes, you will want to know about this audit. You will want to know what's going on with your local school district, and you won't be able to if you pass this bill. And that was, there was the testimony, which got them to inevitably take off the committee substitute. But then there was the public outrage. Most everybody will never submit an open records request in their life. But everybody at some point has come into contact with information that was received through an open records request. If you read local news, that's where it all comes from. And so the public realized that our news isn't able to hold our government accountable. We're not able to hold our government accountable. Sunshine and sunlight is the best of disinfectants. I'm preaching to the choir here, being from Illinois. What is it? 5 of your 7 last governors have served time in prison.
I think it's few. Maybe fewer at the moment. The further we get from that, it's definitely 4.
Okay. But yeah, it's it was. I think that the legislature realized how bad it could be, and I remember there was one member who was there who was actually in the Senate at the time that the Open Records Act had passed. Or no, he was there when Bob Trot had happened, which was the federal investigation that led to the arrest of, I think, 11 legislators in Kentucky. And he had mentioned that he was voting no on the bill to pass out of committee, a Republican voting no against a Republican bill because he was there when Bob Trot had happened. And he wanted to make sure that something like Bob Trot had never happened again, which is legislators were basically taking bribes in order to pass legislation.
Well, yeah. I mean, if we can't tell what's going on, if we can't be privy to our information, I mean, we're the taxpayers. I don't mean to be overly simplistic, but the government works for us, and because we fund it, so we have every right to see it. And then it's a giant red flag when agencies or elected officials are trying to obfuscate that and don't let us see clearly. Those are huge red flags. So, do you see this coming back, or do you think that people got the message that this isn't a no-go?
I think they'll try again at some point. I think that the Open Records Act needs to be amended, just not in this way. So it was passed in 1976, right? But it was the language of the Open Records Act was very broad. It basically said that any document, disk, electronic file that was kept by a government agency was open to inspection. And so we'll need to amend the Open Records Act. I think that the government would try to restrict it a little bit, the legislature. I mean, a few years ago, they passed a restriction that required you to be from Kentucky in order to submit an open records request, which, we're not fans of, but it's not as bad as House Bill 509. And so I think we'll see some stuff. We're going to remain watchful. The one thing this did is, obviously we defeated the bill, which is a good thing, but it really allowed us, AFP's chapter here, to get connected with other people who have a vested stake in government transparency from across the political spectrum. I mean, the head of the Open Government Coalition was an assistant attorney general under a Democratic administration. And so we were able to work with everyone. I think the first line of my testimony in the Senate was, my name's Liam Gallagher, legislative director with Americans for Prosperity, For those of you who know us, we're a rather conservative organization. The fact that we're sitting here with the Kentucky Press Association should show you that there need to be alarm bells going off in your head. And so if it comes back, we'll be ready to fight it.
That's great. Yeah, I think that this is an issue that we end up, partnering with a lot of folks on across the ideological spectrum, which is good, because and it's really helpful. Free speech is kind of another connected issue that I think also we end up finding a lot of allies on the left and on the right and, kind of in the middle. And it's folks who want to be able to know what the government's doing and how they're spending our money, and want to shine a light on the process. So I'm super glad that you guys were able to stop this scariness that was going on in Lexington. Or no, this was Frankfurt, right? Yeah, Frankfurt.
What's how do you say the capital of Kentucky? Louisville or Lexington? I say it Frankfurt.
Frankfurt. I've had that joke before, and I get it. I was the 8th grade geography champion in my middle school, so I've always prided myself on my state capital knowledge, even though I didn't just show it right there.
It's okay. It's close. It's 25 minutes away from where you said. So
it's great.
But you're absolutely right. The free speech issue, this issue, we find common allies. The right to know what your government's doing and the right to complain about it or to say good job is something that is almost at this point uniquely American, and it's something that needs to be protected.
Well, I think you hit on something. I think it's changing incentives a little bit for elected officials, because currently transparency be scary if you're an elected official or a government official, and because it exposes things that maybe people have questions about. And you got to answer questions, and sometimes you feel unfairly, questioned or persecuted. But when groups like ours can celebrate champions of free speech or champions of transparency, or folks who are doing the right thing to try to let taxpayers see what's really going on in their government, when we can change those incentives and praise them for that, in particular their constituents, I think that helps to hopefully encourage that kind of good behavior. I was just saying on another episode, and I say it all the time, that I think one of the things that AFP tries to do is elevate grassroots voices so that we can help our elected officials, or make it easier for our elected officials, do the right thing.
Absolutely. Give them the cover they need to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, Liam, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you stopping this scary bill along with your allies, and hopefully it doesn't come back to scare us again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected to the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.